Intelligence confirms Iran is preparing to deliberately sink one of its own oil tankers at the narrowest point of the Strait of Hormuz. Is this the kill switch for the global economy? The global order operates on the flow of energy. A hidden doctrine, codenamed Black Tide by Western intelligence agencies, is now active. It represents a fundamental shift in asymmetric warfare. The objective is not military victory, but systemic economic collapse. The weapon is not a missile. It is crude oil. For decades, the strategic calculus in the Persian Gulf has been defined by the threat of a conventional military blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. Scenarios involved anti-ship missiles, naval mines, and swarms of fast attack craft. These scenarios are now obsolete. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, specifically its elite Quds Force, has developed a more insidious and potentially irreversible strategy, a deniable act of catastrophic environmental terrorism designed to achieve what no blockade ever could: the complete, long-term closure of the world's most vital energy artery. The plan is simple. The consequences are total. Analysis of satellite imagery from the last 18 months, cross-referenced with human intelligence assets in Bandar Abbas and on the Karg Island oil terminal, reveals a disturbing pattern of acquisitions. The National Iranian Tanker Company, operating through a series of shell corporations registered in Panama and Liberia, has systematically purchased over 24 aging, single-hull oil tankers. These vessels, known in the maritime industry as leper ships, were all destined for the scrapyards of Alang and Chittagong. These are not commercially viable vessels. They fail modern safety inspections, their metal hulls are fatigued past the point of safe operation, and their insurance is non-existent. They are ghost ships, kept afloat for a single, final purpose: to die in the right place at the right time. 31% of the world's seaborne crude oil and petroleum products, along with 20% of global liquefied natural gas, transit this choke point. It is the jugular vein of industrial civilization. The Black Tide doctrine intends to sever it, not with an explosion, but with a slow, toxic bleed. The core of the strategy is plausible deniability. A missile strike is an unambiguous act of war. A mine is traceable, but a decrepit, poorly maintained tanker suffering a catastrophic structural failure in the middle of a narrow shipping lane is, on the surface, a tragic accident. It becomes a humanitarian and environmental crisis, not an act of aggression. The world's attention would shift to containment and cleanup, while the true perpetrators watched the global economy grind to a halt. The international community would be paralyzed, unable to assign blame, with the certainty required to justify a military response. This brings us to the first 3-minute rehook. This is not just a regional security issue, it is a direct threat to the global financial system. What does this mean for global markets? A successful Black Tide event would not cause a gradual rise in oil prices. It would trigger an instantaneous, vertical spike. Crude oil could surge past $300, even $400 a barrel, not in months but in hours. The resulting shock would vaporize trillions of dollars in market capitalization. It would trigger margin calls on an unprecedented scale, potentially creating a liquidity crisis that dwarfs the crash of 2008. Airlines, shipping conglomerates, and manufacturing sectors would face immediate insolvency. The world would not enter a recession, it would enter a depression within a week. This is the economic endgame of the Black Tide doctrine. The operation is under the direct command of a secretive Quds Force unit known only as Unit 400. This unit specializes in unconventional naval operations and plausible deniability tactics. Leaked training manuals, authenticated by multiple intelligence agencies, detail the specific procedures for the mission. The crews selected for these final voyages are not standard merchant mariners. They are highly trained IRGC naval commandos. Their training does not involve navigation or cargo management. It focuses on a single skill set: controlled maritime demolition. They are experts in placing cutting charges on key structural bulkheads and hull plates. The charges are designed not for a massive, obvious explosion, but for a rapid, sequential unzipping of the hull below the waterline. The effect, when viewed from the surface or by satellite, would be a sudden, catastrophic structural failure. The ship would appear to simply break apart and sink under the strain of its own cargo. The ship's log would be falsified. Distress calls would report engine failure and a loss of steering, common ailments for such aging vessels. The narrative of a tragic accident would be established before the first drop of oil reached the surface. The crew would be rescued by nearby Iranian patrol boats, which would be conveniently positioned for a rapid extraction, leaving behind no witnesses, only a sinking wreck and a spreading environmental disaster. The chosen location is critical. The narrowest point of the strait is approximately 21 nautical miles wide, but the navigable shipping lanes for deep draft vessels like supertankers are only 2 miles wide in each direction. Sinking a single very large crude carrier, which can be over 1,000 feet long, in this channel would effectively cork the bottle. The wreck itself would become a massive navigational hazard, but the wreck is only the first stage of the weaponization. The second, more devastating stage is the oil itself. A single VLCC carries over 2 million barrels of crude oil. Releasing this volume into the semi-enclosed, high-current environment of the strait would be an ecological catastrophe, orders of magnitude greater than any previous spill. Cleanup operations in open water are difficult. In a contested military choke point, they would be impossible. This is the 6-minute rehook. How would the world respond to an attack with no definitive perpetrator? An act of war with no fingerprints leaves no clear path for retaliation. Any military action by the United States or its allies would be framed by Iran as an unprovoked aggression in response to a tragic accident. The narrative would be flipped. Tehran would position itself as a victim of circumstance, even offering its own limited resources to assist in the cleanup of its spilled oil, further muddying the waters of culpability. This diplomatic paralysis is a calculated part of the doctrine. While the West debates sanctions and demands investigations, the global economy would be bleeding out. The strait would remain closed. The oil would continue to spread, contaminating desalination plants in the UAE and Qatar, crippling their freshwater supply. Fishing industries across the entire Persian Gulf would be annihilated. The ecological damage would last for generations. The economic damage would be permanent. The intelligence points to one man overseeing the readiness of the Black Tide fleet, Brigadier General Rostam Ghasemi, a shadowy figure within the Quds force, known for his expertise in naval sabotage. Ghasemi is a veteran of the tanker war phase of the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s. He views conventional shipping not as commerce, but as a vulnerability to be exploited. His signature is all over this doctrine. It is patient, ruthless, and prioritizes strategic effect over tactical bravado. For the past 6 months, these tankers have been kept in a state of low-level readiness. Their skeleton crews perform minimal maintenance, just enough to keep the engines from seizing completely. Their true purpose is a closely guarded secret, known only to the highest echelons of the IRGC. But 2 weeks ago, a new phase of activity was detected. Human intelligence sources reported that specialized teams from Unit 400 began boarding each of the 24 vessels in the dead of night. They were not delivering supplies. They were installing the demolition packages. This represents the final stage of weaponization. The ships are now live. They are floating bombs, waiting for a single coded command. The trigger for this operation would not be a direct military attack on Iran. The doctrine is designed as a disproportionate response to a perceived economic or political assault, such as the successful imposition of crippling new sanctions, or a breakthrough in the West's diplomatic isolation of Tehran. We are now at the 9-minute rehook, and the focus shifts from the act itself to the irreversible aftermath. This is not a temporary blockade that ends when a treaty is signed. This is a deliberate salting of the earth on a maritime scale. What happens when the world's most critical waterway becomes a toxic, impassable wasteland for a year or more? The initial cleanup would be hampered by the political and military situation. Skimmers and booms are vulnerable, slow-moving assets, easily targeted by the very same Iranian forces that would deny any involvement in the initial incident. No commercial cleanup company would risk its crews or equipment in a live fire zone. The U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet, based in Bahrain, would be tasked with securing the area, but their primary mission would be military, not environmental. The spill would be allowed to spread, uncontained, for critical days, if not weeks. Strategic petroleum reserves would be released, but they are a finite buffer. They are designed to absorb supply shocks lasting a few months, not a closure that could last for more than a year. The physical cleanup of 2 million barrels of crude oil, combined with the complex salvage operation of a sunken supertanker in a high-traffic channel, is a monumental undertaking. Experts estimate the strait would be partially or fully closed for a minimum of 12 to 18 months. No economy on Earth is prepared for that timeline. Recent signals intelligence has intercepted fragmented communications between Ghasemi's unit and the Port Authority at Karg Island. The chatter references final voyage preparations for a specific vessel. Satellite reconnaissance has identified this vessel as the Mount Crimson Star, a single-hull crude carrier built in 1996. It is the oldest and most derelict tanker in the Black Tide fleet. Its most recent hull integrity report leaked by an asset within the National Iranian Tanker Company, lists its condition as critical, with a high probability of spontaneous structural failure. It is the perfect candidate. For the past 72 hours, the Crimson Star has been taking on a full cargo of heavy Iranian crude oil. At 0300 hours local time this morning, our surveillance confirmed that all loading operations ceased. An elite IRGC Naval Commando unit, consistent in size and equipment with a Unit 400 sabotage team, was observed boarding the vessel. Standard port authorities were ordered away. Satellite tracking now confirms the Mount Crimson Star, the oldest vessel in the Ghost Fleet, has just detached from its anchorage. Its automatic identification system transponder is offline. It is running dark, moving under its own power into the main shipping channel. It is heading east, directly towards the narrowest point of the Strait of Hormuz. Its destination appears obvious, but intelligence is picking up a disturbing anomaly, something that doesn't fit the simple scuttling plan. Ghasemi's teams didn't just rig the ship to sink. They installed a secondary system, a high-temperature chemical aerosolizer. This isn't just about blocking a strait with crude oil. It's about weaponizing the spill itself. But why? What else have they mixed into that cargo? What is the real payload of the Crimson Star? The answer lies not in a complex chemical agent, but in a horrifyingly simple radiological one. The payload is cesium-137, a byproduct of nuclear fission, diverted in minute but potent quantities from Iran's declared and undeclared nuclear programs. It's a dirty bomb on an industrial scale. The crude oil is not just the payload, it's the dispersal medium. The aerosolizer system was never meant to create a gas. It was designed to flash boil the oil cesium slurry into a thick, persistent radioactive vapor that would cling to every surface: water, land, and lung tissue. At 4:53, a single, encrypted burst transmission is detected, originating from a known IRGC command post on Keshem Island. It is a simple two-word command: burn the sea. On the drone feed, the Crimson Star erupts. It is not one explosion, but two distinct events. First, the deep, guttural thud of the primary demolition charges, which tear the hull open below the waterline. But a second later, the real weapon activates. A blinding orange-white light emanates from the deck as the aerosolizer system flash heats the cargo. A monstrous plume of thick, greasy black smoke erupts upwards and outwards, not like a fire, but like a pressurized release. It is the toxic ghost of the ship itself, a radioactive cloud that immediately begins to drift south on the morning breeze. The world has rehearsed the response to an oil spill. It has war-gamed a naval blockade. It has no playbook for this. General Ghasemi has not just closed the Strait of Hormuz. He has turned 25 miles of the most strategic waterway on Earth into a permanent radiological exclusion zone. The sunken wreck is an obstacle. The poisoned water and air are the true barriers. This is the new face of warfare. It's not about conquering territory, but about denying it to the world. It's about creating problems so vast, so expensive, and so persistent that they break economies and shatter alliances from afar. The 21st century battlefield is not always a physical place. Sometimes, it's a system, a supply chain, the global economic artery itself. And it has just been poisoned. The era of predictable conflict is over. To understand the threats of tomorrow, you need to see the connections today. To anticipate the crisis, you must follow the radar. Subscribe to global_crisis_radar and stay ahead of the storm.